a minute to join us.
So you're live whenever you're ready.
I think the mayor may not have heard that we're ready to go.
I heard that. I was just giving Councillor Jeffrey another 30 seconds. I was on the phone with her recently, so I know she's planning to join us. If we don't get her on in the next 30 seconds, we'll start.
I think she's here.
There we go. All right, Council, it's 5 p.m. Time to get down to business. I will read first the land acknowledgement. Today we acknowledge that the Collingwood is located on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, including the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Ojibwe peoples, and on lands connected with the Lake Simcoe-Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818. This is the home of a diverse range of Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors to our society. We've got everyone. We've had regrets from the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Madigan. So I will look for a motion to adopt the agenda. And the motion reads that the content of the council agenda for February 16, 2021 be adopted as amended. And the item being added is a deputation 6.3 overview of the commission process and Collingwood Judicial Inquiry report with Will McDowell and Ryan Breedon, the town's commission solicitors. Is there any amendments to the agenda? Councillor Doherty, go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. Because the ski resorts in Ontario, excuse me, have been permitted to reopen, I will withdraw my motion supporting the Ontario Ski Industry Working Group plan for reopening under Phase 1, for which I had provided notice on February 1st. However, I will offer comment under other business.
All right, thank you. So to be clear then, we are removing under motions item 10.2 and adding an item to other business. So with that being said, are there any other additions or amendments, Council? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Declarations of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Council? Go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I have 3 this evening, assuming that Councillor Doherty is not going to ask for any direction under other business with the ski industry. 1 in open session and 2 in closed session. The first is 9.3.1, the Trails and Active Transportation and Trails Advisory Report with recommendations, as I have an immediate family member who sits on that committee. And in closed session 4.1, the Mountain Road Widening project, I have a brother who is a principal in a corporation that owns property on Mountain Road. And 4.2, the Culbert Estate 167 3rd Street, as I'm a volunteer director of a principal organization with respect to that item.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jeffrey. Any other items, Council? Seeing none, we'll move on to the adoption of the minutes. Actually, before I go farther, I guess, Clerk Almas, I did not get a mover and seconder for the adoption of the agenda. So can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Berman and Councillor McLeod. Thank you for that. the adoption of the minutes, item 4.1. And the motion is that the minutes of the council meeting held January 25, 2021 be approved as presented. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Hamlin, seconded by Councillor Doherty. Are there any errors or omissions, council? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? As carried unanimously. Thank you. Any business arising from the previous minutes, council? Seeing none, that brings us to community announcements, and we will start with Councillor McLeod.
And I have none, thank you.
Councillor Colney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Black History Month, of course, continues. And I know we've been referencing Dr. King, so I found one I thought would be nice for this evening. And it is, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politics? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take it because one's conscience tells it that it's right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. Just one announcement, and that is to remind everyone that the coldest night of the year in support of Home Horizon Barbara Whitehouse will take place this Saturday, February 20th, in a virtual format. This is Home Horizon's most important fundraiser of the year. So it's good to know that you can still participate or seek out someone to sponsor. And you can do so by going online to cnoy.org/location/Collingwood. And again, you can register there or you can sponsor someone else. And if you are looking for someone to sponsor, you can surely consider the Collingwood Council team. And that's it, Your Worship.
Get your tooth ready and get ready to start hiking on Saturday night. Look forward to it. Councillor Berman.
Nothing for me tonight, thank you.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. I'd just like to remind everyone that the Town of Collingwood's International Women's Day event will be happening virtually on Monday, March 8th, starting at noon for 2 hours. So as a virtual event, you still must register because there is a certain amount of seating available. And we have an outstanding lineup of panelists. And it's going to be a fantastic international event. So we also have 2 special guest panelists from the FCM Jordan Municipal Support Project participating, and we're all very excited about it. So you can go to collingwood.ca/IWD and the link is there to register. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. We look forward to that. Councillor Hamlin.
Nothing this evening, thank you.
All right, I have one very unfortunate announcement, and that is to remember the sudden passing of Roger Larker over the weekend. Roger was a true native son. He established a number of businesses, a true entrepreneur in our community. He raised a great family, Krista and Dean, and his grandchildren, Kelly, Caitlin, and Kendall and Cameron, and leaves his wife, Gail. So it's a very unfortunate day, and we certainly keep their family in our minds and offer them our sincere condolences on Roger's passing. And with that said, that brings us to deputations. And our first deputation tonight is 6.1 Heritage Week. And we have the Collingwood Heritage Committee Chair, Jennifer McEwen, here.
Through you, Your Worship, it looks like Jennifer's having difficulty connecting.
All right, should we go then to the second deputation, or can we get Jennifer in at this point?
I would suggest going to the second deputation at this point.
Okay, thank you. Our second deputation is also about Heritage Week, and Marg Mooy is here on behalf of ACO Collingwood. Welcome, Margaret. Can you hear us? Hi, Margaret. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. And I'm clear for you too?
Yes, we can hear you. So
Okay.
you have 10 minutes. Go ahead, please.
And has my PowerPoint been put up on the screen?
No, not yet. Sarah, or can you handle that for us? We're working on that right now.
Yeah.
Okay, we're ready to begin. Okay, thank you. Mary Saunderson, council, staff, and community members. On behalf of ACO, thank you for allowing me to contribute to the celebration of Heritage Week 2021. The Heritage Committee, I presume, has already shared some of their activities and goals over the past year. While we are different organizations, we also share many common philosophies, partner in many activities, and generally try to support one another. Next slide. Our provincial mandate reads as follows: through education and advocacy to encourage the conservation and reuse of structures, districts, and landscapes, which is very important, of architectural, historic, and cultural significance, we aim to inspire and benefit all Ontarians. Basically, we are supporting heritage throughout Ontario, but being a branch of the provincial organization, we are specifically supporting Collingwood's heritage. Next slide. Because we share a common philosophy with the Heritage Committee, ACO has supported the committee by offering resources and contributing to discussions during the committee meetings. 80% of our board members have served on the committee in the past. ACO also supports Heritage Committee's goals and priorities as reviewed with Council earlier this month, specifically increasing the heritage tax rebate and completing a study to add an additional heritage district. Next slide. We were very pleased that the Heritage Committee accepted our suggestion at one of their meetings to develop a Wikipedia page, and I know that's well on its way, and to update the heritage webpage as a link with the Town of Collingwood website. I believe that the 4 walking tours will be available as PDFs on this site. And I believe that the original brochures will also be available for those people that don't like to walk around looking at their cell phone. Next slide. ACO has contributed to Collingwood's official plan update, the community-based strategic plan for arts and culture, and specifically heritage, as well as the Main Street modernization project. We also had a tent during Collingwood's Summer Street Festival to build public awareness of our heritage. Next slide. Our branch was pleased to nominate Black Bellows for the ACO reuse of an historic property for small business. Although our nomination did not win in its category, it was a good recognition for the town of Collingwood. Next slide. We were very pleased to be able to join this presentation to the Heritage Committee, and were impressed by Michael McClellan's following quote about Collingwood's heritage. I find more and more the interest has been not only the downtown core, and that certainly needs to be conserved. It needs probably the highest degree of conservation because of the quality of the buildings, but also this broader sense of understanding of communities and neighborhoods within Collingwood, as well as specific landmarks and interesting context around those landmarks, even outside the district. And that's very important. Next slide. We've been involved more with social media. As a local branch, we've increased our use and we focused a lot on Facebook in an effort to reach out to the community about issues that impact the cultural and built heritage of Collingwood. We're also attempting to build community awareness of architectural styles and features of historic building attributes. Recently, we were pleased to post that the town has hired a recognized architect firm, WeMo, that has worked with ACO in the past. They hope to integrate design and heritage conservation to play a role in the feasibility studies for an art center. Check out the latest post on Facebook, and that's ACO Collingwood, to see fine examples of Queen Anne Revival style homes that were just posted today. Next slide. You've seen these pictures last year. They are the icons or the historical properties that are still on the endangered properties list of the province. We are hopeful that the Victoria Annex will be removed from this list once this development finally gets underway after 12 years of advocating for adaptive reuse. We are also hopeful that the green elevators will eventually end with a positive resolution of adaptive reuse. When the RFP process evolves, we may be able to also recommend removing this historical icon from the list as well. The Nottawasaga Lighthouse Group are continuing their efforts to preserve and protect as well. Next slide. Jennifer may have mentioned that there is still a pending new designation on Birch Street, which was mentioned last year as well. It is important to continue to encourage heritage designations outside the Heritage Conservation District. Maintaining our tree-lined streetscape is important as there are presently many infill projects happening. It's also important to complete heritage impact assessments when new construction is adjacent to a property with a heritage designation. So we'll look forward to the future of this coming up at one of the council meetings for your approval. Next slide. ACO did not support Bill 229. We felt that limiting the powers of the Conservation Authority to comment on land use, planning decisions, and proposed development removed the excellent protection that was given by the conservation authorities. Next slide. Once again this year, we're celebrating Heritage Week and a special day, Heritage Advocacy Day at Queen's Park. Members of ACO, supported by a number of members of Parliament, are meeting this year virtually on Thursday to recognize this special day. And this year's themes are building, conservation, heritage tourism, Main Street projects, and improved and stricter building codes to support heritage. Next slide. We will continue, and our future aims and objectives for ACO Collingwood is to continue to build community partnerships to strengthen Collingwood's rich and vital heritage. Our strong heritage builds on the pillars of society to provide a sustainable community with cultural vitality, strong economic health, environmental responsibility, and community involvement. Heritage gives us a sense of place. And personally, I feel that a community that works together will stay together and grow stronger. Next slide. Thank you very much for listening to ACO's presentation in celebration of Heritage Week. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that excellent presentation, Margaret. Council, are there any questions or comments for Ms. Mooy? I'm seeing the thumbs up sign. So thank you very much, Margaret. And we will see you about town.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sarah, do we have we worked out our issues for Jennifer?
Yes, your worship, I think we have her here now, so we will admit her in.
There we go. We can see her.
I see the mayor's. Yep.
Yep. Chair McEwen, we've got you.
Okay, Justin, thank you.
Go
Right.
ahead.
Sorry, I was,
That's-
yeah, we had a little bit of technical difficulty.
We got you here. That's the
I'm
main-
here now.
So the floor is yours. Go ahead, please.
Well, welcome this Heritage Week. And I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about the history. A lot of people that are newer to the area may not know. I understand that there were settlers that they know of in the 1840s. And originally, this area was called Hen and Chickens. In 1854, Admiral Lord Cuthbert Collingwood, in honor of the Admiral, they changed the name to the town of Collingwood. It was incorporated in 1858. We had a railway that came through in 1855. And then in 1881, we had a fire. And most people probably know about that. It was quite devastating, but the town rallied back. And a lot of the buildings that we have, next slide, Stephanie. Sorry, I have to remember to get the slide switched. So they rallied back well and rebuilt the town of Collingwood, a lot of that had been destroyed. Next slide, you'll see a couple of the beautiful buildings. This is what was the post office for many years, federal government now. And next slide shows us the shipyards, which were built in 1889 and closed, sadly, in 1986. One of the few side launching shipyards in the world. But there's a lot of history for Collingwood. And next slide. I encourage everybody to go down to the museum and take a look. We have a pretty rich history here for such a small town. So next slide takes us to the Collingwood Heritage District. And it was the first municipality on the Canadian Register of Historic Places. That was in December 12th, 2002. Next slide. Oh, there's a picture of our district. And our district, and I think I overheard through Justin's phone, Margie has already mentioned, the area that's lined in red is what we call Part 5. And anything within that district is deemed to be under the historical district plan. We also have a Part 4, and those are significant buildings that fall outside the area that you see in the red line. So our next slide, I think, just shows us the shipyard again. And the next slide takes us to the summary of objectives. And this is the objectives and policies that are actually within the district's bylaws. And I'll go over very quickly: to encourage adaptive reuse of the heritage buildings, avoid demolition or removal of heritage buildings, retain, conserve heritage buildings, to retain, repair, and restore architectural features, remove incompatible past alterations, to encourage maintenance to protect the heritage buildings from damage from weather, flood, fire, etc., and to enforce the building standard bylaw as permitted under the Ontario Heritage Act. So that gives you a summary. There's actually about 4 or 5 pages of objectives and policies in the bylaw, but that gives you a summary. They also talk about, our next slide takes us to community support. And we've been very lucky here in Collingwood. I remember what Collingwood looked like when you go back to the 70s and 80s. And a lot of the town was rather, these beautiful old places were very tired and falling apart. So there's obviously been good community support, because there have people who have come up and spent the money, taken the time, and renovated these beautiful old homes and buildings. And we still have more work to do. But within the bylaws, they encourage us to foster community support, promote value in the preservation of heritage buildings and character of the district for future generations, encourage public participation and involvement. And we're very lucky we have a lot of that. I know many of our meetings, Lindsay from the museum will sit in, and she has a wealth of knowledge. She has a very, very good background in the history of Collingwood. ACO is very, very supportive for the committee for sure, and elsewhere within the town, dealing with properties like the grain elevators and the lighthouse. ACO has been a very good and supportive community member. And it would be actually quite nice if they were able to sit at our table, as Lindsay does, even as a non-voting member. So I would encourage that if council was open to that idea. So we also want to encourage public participation. I'm going to talk a little bit more later on about education and awareness and the technological things that we're doing moving forward. So another mention in the bylaws is to offer assistance and incentives to owners. And that brings me to the sort of tax portion. Next slide, Stephanie. For the heritage property tax relief. And just to give you a brief synopsis of what that does, it's a financial tool that municipalities are able to give to municipalities or to give to owners to help with maintain and repair the heritage properties, and which is really good for the community today and into the future. It's good for attracting people in. I know when people travel, strangely, for some strange reason, we always seem to be attracted to beautiful old buildings, no matter where we travel in the world. And Collingwood is a very good example of, especially in Canada and in Ontario, it's amazing for such a small town that we have such a nice, beautiful area with so much heritage in it for the size that it is. Now, the next slide is going to show you the comparisons in Simcoe County for the heritage property tax relief. And how this works is, for example, with this 10%, we also will be matched up with the county for a certain amount of money, and the province will also waive the school portion of the owner's taxes. Now, throughout Ontario, majority seem to be in the 40% range of this tax rebate. And you have the three sides ticking in for that amount. So the municipality is paying one portion of it. And I'll have a better slide with you at our next meeting, re-taxes. But you'll see even through Simcoe County, most of the Penetanguishene, Midland, Springwater, and Tay are all at 40%. And that seems to be the average throughout Ontario. So we're still at 10%. And I know that it's been a rough few years with expenses, and COVID certainly hasn't helped any. But we would like to discuss that with council at a future time for you. So try and keep that in mind. We did put a motion. We had a motion in our November meeting, and we have asked a few times. So food for thought for council for now, and we'll talk more about that at a later date. Also, there's the reserve fund that we have. And we will also be coming forward to ask for an increase on that to be considered in the next budget. So our next slide takes us to worth mentioning, our properties that are worth mentioning. So this year we have two for the awards, and that is 33 St. Marie Street and Black Bellows. Both have been done very nicely. You'll see the older pictures and the work that the owners have put into both of these places. And those are what will be considered for the awards. Unfortunately, being with COVID, those awards will be given at a later date, and I gather that's by the mayor at a later time. So I guess we'll find out what that date will be. Now, also worth mention is the designation of annex at 400 Maple. Next slide, Stephanie. Oh, pardon me, you're on the right one. So you'll see an old picture of the annex, which is a portion of what the original school building was. I guess the rest had been taken down in the late 60s, but we still have a very nice portion of that building remaining, and that has been designated. Birch Street is still pending, but you can see here the before and after. The owners have put quite a lot of work into that as well. Next slide will take us to the Old Town Terrace, which is in progress right now. I wish we had a before picture because the transformation is really quite nice. We have a lot to celebrate in this town. And Tremont is one of those things to celebrate. Their 10th anniversary, which was in September of last fall. You'll also see by the pictures, the before and after, and the work that Mr. Lex has put into this building, trying to take it back to its earlier stage, and he's done a really nice job. So that's a 10th year anniversary worth celebrating. Our next slide takes us to Sporting Life. That's where we had the fire last year. And so the drawings are in now, and this will be in the works coming up. And I think it's, they've done a very nice job of this. It was a rather insubstantial building that was there before and not nearly as nice. So we look forward to seeing that coming up in the near future. So next slide takes us to moving forward. So we're promoting Heritage Week. It's unfortunate that we have COVID and we have to do everything online. Excuse me. And with any luck, maybe we'll be able to do the do doors open without it being virtual. But the technology in today's world is also much to celebrate. We have a website that has been done. We saw a sample of it at our last meeting, and the gentleman who did it must have done an awful lot of work. That will be coming up shortly. I guess he's waiting for the approval from the, I don't know if it's Google or whoever he gets the approval from, and that will be coming up, and there'll be links as well. For example, the self-registering for companies that do restoration on old buildings. That was one of our challenges in the meetings, is that there are many people that do this work, but they're not well advertised in yellow pages, etc. So owners coming in didn't know where to go to find these Mennonites and people who did this work. So this is something that will also be added to the website, and people will be able to go on and put their name and number for owners to contact them for any work that needs to be done on older buildings. And we're going to be migrating the Heritage website platform, as well as enhancing the Heritage brochures. And the tours, the 4 tours that we have of the downtown and surrounding area, will also be interactive. People will be able to use their telephones, their cell phones, and get information about the properties they're standing in front of. And the interaction will also help direct them to the different places on those tours. So we have an awful lot to be grateful for, and much to look forward to. And I think we can be very proud of Collingwood from a heritage standpoint. So I wish everybody well, stay safe, warm, and healthy.
Thank you, Chair McEwen, for the excellent presentation. Council, are there any questions or comments for Jennifer?
Or Justin.
Justin's in the background.
Good.
Thank you very much. And stay warm and safe yourself.
Thank you.
All right. And that brings us to our third deputation, which is an overview of the commission process and the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry. And we have Mr. McDowell and Mr. Breedon here. All right. I see both of you. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello.
And the floor is yours. Go ahead, please.
All right. Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. So I wanted to just give a quick overview of how it was that we came to have the judicial inquiry, and then go through some of the key findings of the commissioner's report and some of the recommendations. So there were years of rumors and speculation concerning the sale of 50% of the town's utility, Collis Power. There were also questions, there were also rumors about the decision which the town took to purchase sprung structures to cover the arena and the pool. And there were rumors about just who benefited from these transactions. There were many questions as well about, after the sale of half of the utility, what the agreements were for cost sharing and the provision of services among the town and Collis Power and the town's new partner, PowerStream, now Electra. So in 2013, I believe, John Brown became the chief administrative officer of the town. He raised these questions somewhat aggressively sometimes, it has to be said. And as Commissioner Morocco said in his report, having asked lots of questions, he didn't get satisfactory answers. So then advice was then sought from us at Leinster Slat whether further investigation of these matters was warranted. And I guess our view at the time was twofold. Yes, there were things that deserved a proper investigation and in fact taking the extraordinary step of a judicial inquiry. But the second thing that we said was a judicial inquiry under the Municipal Act you could expect would be an expensive process. So both of these expectations have proven to be true. To deal with the cost, I think it is fair to say that the inquiry cost far more than anyone expected at the front end. There are different reasons for this. One is that there turned out to be issues that nobody knew about until production was made to the inquiry and in fact until evidence was called. For example, the depth of the business arrangements and relationships among Paul Bonwick, Ed Houghton, and Collis, as one example, through the solar vent company. Second, there turned out to be an enormous volume of email which had to be reviewed and produced. If you do a close examination of the report, you will see that many of the commissioner's central findings are anchored in email exchanges among people at the town, outsiders, among some of the other participants. The town, just to take the example of the town as one party, the initial document scan produced more than 4 million documents of all kinds at the town. Now, when the document management companies whittled this down, there were ultimately just under 400,000 documents. And there were similar numbers produced by Electra and other participants. So the process of document management is costly. It's staggering to an outsider coming at this and looking at it, but in the 21st century, it's a necessity. The other thing that I think we can fairly say about the cost is that COVID has played its part. The report was initially projected to come out in March of 2020. It was then July, and then ultimately it was released in early December. And we don't have really too much visibility into just how that affected the cost, but it's pretty clear that it did. Now, but to return to the first point, the first expectation, yes, these were matters that did warrant examination, and it's clear from the commissioner's findings that that too was beyond the case when anyone looked at this at the front end. So to look at the first part of the inquiry, this is the PowerStream transaction. On the commissioner's findings, Mr. Houghton, on behalf of the town, with the tacit acceptance of Mayor Cooper, but really without her participation, and certainly without the participation of council, decided that the town should sell 50% of its utility. Now, Commissioner Morocco makes a couple of points about this. One, given what the town wanted to do in paying down some of its debt, it really wasn't necessary to sell the utility in whole or in part at all. Mr. Houghton and others set upon this course without the benefit of any expert advice. For example, from KPMG said, you know, when we've given our presentation on this issue to other municipalities, some of them have decided to maintain the status quo, for example, Orangeville. The decision to sell half of the utility, again, is one that seems to have been made without the benefit of expert advice. When the decision was made to embark upon an RFP process, the playing field ultimately was hopelessly tilted towards PowerStream as a proponent. I'm paraphrasing here, but the commissioner describes a culture and practice within Collingwood, within the town of Collingwood at that time, where relevant information, highly relevant information, was withheld from town council, while at the same time, confidential information was improperly shared with PowerStream, one of the proponents in the RFP. The commissioner found that PowerStream won the RFP despite bidding $3.5 million less than the highest financial bidder. And he said that the result of the RFP was that PowerStream succeeded, but that this result was, to quote, blighted by its unfair advantage, end quote. Now, Paul Bonwick, as you will have read, of course, the brother of Mayor Cooper, figured prominently in the PowerStream chapter. With the backing of Mr. Houghton, Mr. Bonwick became a highly paid consultant for PowerStream. Mr. Bonwick got a reference effectively from Mr. Houghton. Mr. Bonwick repeatedly gained access to information confidential to the town, which he shared with PowerStream. And again, on the commissioner's findings, PowerStream seems to have been quite happy to receive the confidential information. Now, a central finding as well that the commissioner made was that council simply accepted that the 50% option was in the interests of both Collis Power and the town. And in fact, Commissioner Morocco found that the option prioritized the interests of Collis over those of the town. Ultimately, of course, this worked in the interest of PowerStream as well. And the commissioner, on his findings, I think it's fair to say, does not really see how the transaction particularly benefited the interest of the town. Another important observation that the commissioner made was that Mr. Houghton was the CEO of Collis Power. He was paid by Collis Power, but he was also executive director of Public Works and Engineering of the town. He wasn't paid by the town. He took the position that he was simply a volunteer for the town. The commissioner quoted Mr. Houghton as saying, "My job is to look after the corporation," which I did. That is the utility. If council came back to us and said specifically, "We want you to bring us cash out of the company," we would have done that. My job, my fiduciary responsibility is to call us, and that's what we did. But to pause there, because this is really important. This is a huge problem that council had created or had allowed to emerge. That you had Mr. Houghton, who had very senior jobs, and in each of those jobs he owed fiduciary responsibilities, but those responsibilities were in conflict. And so the town, to this extent, was the author of its own misfortune. This odd relationship between the two jobs is something that I think is quite central to what happened. Now, to turn to the second part of the inquiry, the arena and pool part, The commissioner found, again paraphrasing, that the same players and some of the same pathologies were at play there as well. Mr. Houghton didn't share critical information with the town. The deputy mayor, Rick Lloyd, promoted the idea to BLT, the construction company which built the sprung structure, that it would be a good idea to have Mr. Bonwick be part of the process. Again, the town's confidential information was shared with Mr. Bonwick. Mr. Bonwick in turn shared it with BLT. Senior staff should have been permitted to do a thorough review of options for the recreational facilities. Rick Lloyd and Mr. Houghton interfered with their ability to do this. The staff report, which initially recommended that an RFP take place, was changed at the 11th hour with extraordinary intervention from Mr. Houghton to recommend a sole source contract to Sprung and BLT. And the deputy mayor, the commissioner found, applied pressure throughout the process. Mr. Houghton did not negotiate with BLT at all concerning the price of the facilities. And the commissioner finds there was really no good reason for this absence of negotiation. Mr. Bonwick hid the fact that he was a consultant for BLT, even though he was having discussions with members of council. The commissioner found that Mr. Houghton should have told council that Mr. Bonwick was involved and that he was earning a success fee, but he didn't tell council. He found that council, had they known that, might have had a different view of whether or not to go ahead with the transaction at all, or to demand that there be negotiations. And just on the point of the success fee, it was frankly massive, $756,000 for a few weeks' work. The commissioner finds that it is possible that the town paid too much for the sprung structures and their construction because of the actions of Mr. Bonwick, and, if you will, the inaction of Mr. Houghton, that is, in failing to tell council about Mr. Bonwick's activities. Now, speak briefly about the recommendations of the commissioner. At the front end, when there was discussion about whether or not there should be an inquiry, there were some commentators and there were some people in council who said, well, to the extent there are any problems in the town's processes in 2012, 2013, they've been rectified. The commissioner made 306 recommendations in his report. Some of these are at the provincial level, dealing with recommended changes to the Municipal Act. I won't deal with these in any depth, but some of these have to do with the ambit of the umbrella of conflict of interest, expanding it to ensure that the interests of relatives are taken into account, not just those of public office holders. There are also ones that deal with enshrining in legislation the ability of municipal staff to provide objective and politically neutral advice, and to ensure that there's no undue influence of staff by members of council. And there's some recommendations about legislative changes to protect the ability of public servants to give that advice. At the town level, the commissioner has made some important recommendations. As you will have seen, many of these sought to protect the integrity of the processes of council. He wanted a reinforced code of conduct in relation to intimidation or improper influence of staff members. He wants codes strengthened to ensure that staff advice is neutral. His recommendations dealing with procurement are quite important. He said that there should be strong presumption in favor of RFPs and other competitive processes. He says that there should be transparency in the procurement process. And an important part of that is by creating a lobbyist registry so that everyone is aware if there are consultants dealing with staff on behalf of companies wanting to engage in procurement with the town. He also made recommendations about ensuring that council receive the appropriate professional advice when making significant decisions, such as in relation to the Collis Power sale. So with that, I'll turn it over to my co-counsel Ryan Breedon to see if he has anything to add, and we're happy to take your questions.
No, I don't have anything to add to that.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Sorry, I think you're on mute, Your Worship.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for that, Counsel. Is there any questions for Mr. McDowell or Mr. Breedon on their report? Yes, go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Through you to our council. I guess the biggest hit that we're taking from the public is the cost, and you opened your remarks in addressing or trying to explain that. I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit more on what you would summarize as your success or not success with regard to all the work we did in refining the scope of the judicial inquiry. And I think you explained it a little bit, but I really want the public to get the sense of how much work we did. And based on the initial quote of 1 million to 1.5 million, and then we did another check-in with our council at 3 million, asking about the scope and how that was going to help us going down the road. So if you would have any further comment on your success or failure that way. Thank you.
Well, a couple of comments there. First of all, the initial estimate, which was done for town council about the cost, that is not one that we were consulted about or that we signed off on, for the simple reason that we hadn't been retained at that point to actually conduct the inquiry. On the question of the scope and whether or not this inquiry was properly scoped, I believe that it was, because the terms of reference were crafted in such a way as to say that the commissioner would have a free hand in examining these two fundamental transactions. There was not a clause that said, and he can examine anything else that happens to come along the way. There was a part of the terms of reference which said that he should conduct an examination of the documents, and he should then come to a landing on whether and to what extent he was going to have public hearings. For better or worse, he determined that he did have to have a significant number of days of public hearings in this matter. And if once you get into the realm where, and I think you, frankly, in judicial inquiries under the Municipal Act, I think you do have to have public hearings. That is the fundamental mechanism. But once you do that, you then have to give standing to people whose interests are substantially affected. He turned down some people who wanted standing, or turned down requests for funding, which I think tended to limit the course of the inquiry. But where I think if you're looking for failures, or you're looking for costs that were unexpectedly quite high, the document management cost, I think, is one that was higher than I would have projected at the front end. It was quite significant. So I don't think that at all that this was a commissioner or his commission counsel which were somehow running off the rails. I think that they looked into exactly what they were directed to look into by the terms of reference. As I say, I do think that the fact that we had the pandemic come along delayed the delivery of the report. I don't know, because I haven't done the kind of forensic analysis of what the run rate was during the pandemic months and the extent to which that run rate, if you will, continued for a number of months beyond what would have been anticipated. So I think that's what I would say in answer to your question, Councilor Jeffrey.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Councilor Jeffrey?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Saunderson. And just one final, I guess, in terms of a comment, I think these were substantial findings. I think it wasn't one of those cases that were described to us previously where you could do a judicial inquiry and find nothing. But maybe just comment on what you feel about the outcomes from your perspective on as our council.
Well, one of the things that I did over the weekend was look at our submission in each phase to the commissioner. And I don't think there is a single factual submission we made to him that he rejected. He made very substantial findings, and he didn't accept any of the explanations that were given to him that might have been convenient ways out, but which didn't ring true. You know, so for example, there was a tendency in some of the witnesses to say, well, Mr. Muncaster, who was a great benefit to the utility on its board in his lifetime, he approved this. He, you know, accepted some of the things that were done that were controversial. The commissioner, it would have been a very convenient time for him to say, yes, I accept that. He didn't. He actually rejected that in some significant instances. And there are other points too where there were opportunities for him, frankly, to make convenient findings, which he simply did not do. To the extent that witnesses or parties were trying to say to him, you know, you don't have to make a hard finding here. Here's an alternative set of facts. He just did not do that. And so my only regret about this inquiry is the cost. You know, as somebody who recommended looking into this, you have a point where you think, you know, what if I'm wrong? What if some judge comes along and looks at this and says, you know, really there was nothing to see here. And it became pretty obvious pretty quickly that there really was something to see here. So I was relieved, but that relief changed a bit as the cost went up and up and up. And I confess that I do have some regret about the cost.
That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor McLeod and then Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you. Thank you for coming back to see us again, gentlemen, and I look forward to hearing more from you in camera. Although I think some of the questions that I would like to ask you, I'd like to ask you in public, and one of which is, I think sometimes we can get caught up in legalistic wording. And so I have had, after my reading of the 900 pages, have had people say, oh, nobody was found at fault. No one was found to have been in trouble. And I wonder if perhaps, as you've said in the last few minutes, Mr. McDowell, the findings of the justice, the findings of the justice, the findings of the justice, could you maybe just translate that for perhaps lay people who don't understand that the judge may or may not have found things that they found things to be at fault? A finding is a fault finding, yes?
Right. I'm immediately going to be legalistic here, but look at it this way, that the commissioner is forbidden by law from making findings of civil or criminal liability. So at the end of this process, he can't send anybody to jail and he can't say, you have to pay $1 million. But did he criticize some of the players involved in this? He absolutely did. He was critical of Power Street, for example, for its access to confidential information it should not have had. He was critical of Mr. Houghton in both phases, quite profoundly critical, in fact. In the second part of his findings dealing with Sprung and BLT, he made significant findings and significantly criticized Mr. Houghton for things that he did on the one hand that advantaged BLT and disadvantaged the town. So he did find fault He certainly found fault with Mr. Bonwick. He found fault in the first part with certain members of council and with the mayor, who frankly, it's impossible to read it without thinking that the commissioner accepted that she hadn't intervened enough when she should have. But the problem is, I think that in common parlance, yes, he criticized people. Yes, he found fault. But then there's another notion of fault, which is a legal definition, and that's what he couldn't do. Mr. Breedon, help me out here.
Well, I think that's it exactly. I mean, the commissioner opened the proceedings by cautioning everybody that he didn't have the ability to make the sort of criminal or civil findings that may be what people are raising with you, Councillor McLeod, but certainly, you know, did go on to find to make specific findings with respect to the conduct. I'm sort of one of the telling things is that, you know, this inquiry arose out of a kind of public outcry around these transactions, and right in his introduction, Justice Morocco wrote that those concerns were legitimate, and then went on to set out the basis. And so I think that's, you know, in terms of achieving what he was asked to do, I think he did.
Follow-up, Councillor McLeod?
Yes, thank you. And I'm sorry to belabor some of these points, but I think that the lay language is quite important as we do the work that we do. And so I wonder if you could translate for us as well the phrase "does not accept" when a justice writes that in a report of this nature. When a justice does not accept the testimony of a person, what does that mean, really?
Well, that means that John Smith came before me and he testified that this happened on Tuesday. I do not accept that evidence. That means that the witness testifying under oath has said something which the judge did not believe. Now, he could have not believed it for a bunch of reasons. He could have not believed it because he thought the witness was being dishonest. He could have not believed it because he thought the witness was simply mistaken. And again, it's somewhere where, given what he's doing, he has to be careful. He can't make a finding that the witness is guilty of perjury because the law prohibits him from doing that. But it's a pretty strong thing when someone comes and gives an elaborate account of how something happened and why it happened, and the judge simply says, I don't accept that. Now, particularly, Councillor McLeod, if you read the report and you look at a witness who 10, 15, 20 times gives evidence which is not accepted, that when you begin to total those up, you begin to say, well, that wasn't a very good witness.
So 60 would be quite something.
I haven't counted, but yes, that would be quite something.
I did. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, did either of you during your time in our council chambers get the impression, and I'm struck by the fact, Mr. McDowell, that you said there were 4 million documents provided at the beginning of the inquiry. Did you at any time feel as though that was an excessive amount in an attempt to perhaps bury the truth or bury things under those mountains of paperwork and emails?
Maybe I should respond to that, since I was handling the document management side largely. I think the majority of the documents that were produced to the inquiry were produced from the town. So we were the ones who were burying the commission under the documents, and it was just because we were required to search all of the documents, and really in this case it was all of the emails that the town had, to identify anything that might be relevant to the terms of inquiry, which were quite broad. We made a decision to try to save money, to avoid conducting first an internal review ourselves and then turning the documents over to the inquiry, who would then have to re-review them themselves. So we, using the computer search terms and so on, isolated what struck us to be the likely relevant and non-privileged documents, and then turn those over en masse to the inquiry to do their review. Other parties would have done an internal review to call out anything that wasn't relevant first and turn over documents. So other parties may have produced a large number of documents, but I suspect that the town is by far the largest offender in that regard. And it's just because of the nature of the inquiry. I mean, almost all of the documents that were relied on by the inquiry ultimately were emails sent on town accounts.
But one of the other things I should say is that it's a revelation, just, when you look at the gross number of documents that are produced. So in order to come here today, I think I've had 3 or 4 emails with Ms. Almas and Ms. Skinner. If you say produce all of those emails from the town system, you won't get 7 emails. You'll get 65 or 70, just because of the way systems reproduce them. And one of the big tasks that you have to do in all of projects like this is you have to have a document management firm dedupe, like take all of the duplicates away. And so the 4 million document number becomes something, a very small percentage of that, as it did in this case.
Thank you. That clarifies things somewhat for me. I have just one more question, I think, at this point, and that is, if that's all right with you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Did either of you gentlemen get the impression that some of the questioning that was taking place in our council chamber was excessive or slowed down in an attempt to what I can only describe as a filibuster? In an attempt to run up costs? Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Who wants to take that? Go ahead, Mr. McDowell.
No, do I think all of the questioning was particularly effective? No, I don't. But did I think that was in an effort to kind of run up the tab? I certainly didn't think that at the time. I had moments of frustration that it wasn't particularly direct sometimes, and it wasn't particularly efficient. But I didn't ascribe any malice to that. And one of the other things I would say is that a very, very experienced trial judge who was the commissioner. And Mr. Breedon will correct me, I can't think of many instances where the commissioner said, come on, hurry up, finish, you got to get through this. So to me, that's a telling fact. I think it's a good question to ask, but I didn't have that impression at the time. Mr. Breedon, do you have a comment?
Oh, I agree completely with that.
Thank you. I think that's it, unless something occurs to me in the next few minutes. I appreciate your time, gentlemen.
Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. One question I've heard a few times from our community is why, or whether I guess I'd say whether, when we saw that the costs were increasing so far beyond what anyone had anticipated, didn't council, move to put some constraints on what the commissioner was looking at, or how long the hearing would be, or sort of midstream, start pulling back? Was that an option we could have taken?
No, for reasons of judicial independence, that's not a realistic option. And council, your predecessors in council knew this at the front end, that one of the facts of life in commissions of inquiry at the municipal level is that once terms of reference are given to the Chief Justice in the first instance, the Chief Justice appoints a judge who becomes a commissioner. And the commissioner examines the matters, specifies the terms of reference until he or she is satisfied that they've been adequately examined, and then there's a report written. So it's not open to the town in this instance to say to the judge, look, you've had your $2 million worth of evidence here, and we want you to shut it down. That's a breach of the independence that the commissioner enjoys as a judicial officer.
Thank you. That's very helpful. That was my only question. Thank you.
Councillor Berman.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Through you, I guess to Mr. McDowell, and just to pick up on something that you and Councillor McLeod were talking about, sort of what the meaning of testimony that Justice Morocco didn't accept. When you tie that into the overall cost, which is what a lot of people want to talk about, some of the things like the documents and whatnot have been explained. But when I take a look at the witness list for both parts 1 and part 2 combined, I really felt, and I think you might agree, that minus Mr. Houghton, Justice Morocco accepted the evidence given by current and former town employees. Is that sort of a fair starting point?
Yes, I think it is. I think there might be 1 or 2 places where that's not the case, but in the main, I think that's true, and it's certainly true that the evidence of current employees of the town, or even recently departed employees like the former treasurer, was accepted, I think, without question.
Okay, my apologies. That was sort of rhetorical, and I didn't say that up front, but that was my take on it. And I found a large majority of everybody that fell outside of that category of the current and former employees. Those were the people, some obviously much more than others, where he didn't accept their testimony. And maybe you could just nod if in general that's a fair statement.
Well, I haven't done a calculation, but I think just as an impression, I think that's correct.
Okay, so it leads me to, again, what I hope is a rhetorical question, that had the people, the witnesses whose testimony Justice Morocco didn't accept, told, and I don't know what the proper term is, I want to say told the truth, but maybe it would be better just to say told acceptable evidence, would that have made this inquiry significantly less expensive?
I would answer that this way, that during the course of the inquiry and side conversations with people ran into in Collingwood, and the odd time overhearing hallway discussion and so on, it frustrated me that some of the people in the position to have said, as the discussion about having an inquiry was going on, it was open to them to say, look, here are the facts, and here's everything you need to know. But they didn't do that, right? They didn't do that. And in some instances came to the inquiry and over and over and over maintained that there was nothing to see here, and there was nothing wrong with anything that had been done at all. So that's the way I would put it. It would be one thing if some of the people who are complaining about the cost of the inquiry had come to the inquiry and said, either at the very beginning or even before it was called, cards on the table, here's the truth about what happened, and the entire truth. And if you want me to produce all my emails, we'll find a way to do it. That did not happen. In fact, in having been in the room at the front end, there were certainly people on council who said there's absolutely nothing to see here, there's nothing improper that has happened, and so on. So I just make that observation.
Okay, and I think that's the answer I was expecting. So I don't know, I guess the only other thing I'd ask to follow it up, but I don't think you can really answer it, is based on that. I believe the answer to be, yeah, it would have been significantly less. So my question would be that if those same people that were central to this had simply told the truth or given acceptable answers as far back as 2012, do you think we could have avoided the need for an inquiry altogether?
I don't want to answer that directly, but look at what the commissioner has to say about the former CAO, John Brown, asking highly pertinent questions to people like Mr. Houghton, to the utility, to Power Stream, and not getting answers. You know, there's a direct line between his experience and the inquiry being called. So I don't think you and I are disagreeing with each other. I'm just more comfortable saying that than answering directly.
You'd make a good politician. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Berman. Council, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I have a couple, gentlemen. And it picks a little at what the conversation you've just had with Councillor Berman. Former Mayor Cooper indicated in an article once the reasons came out that this could have been an integrity commissioner complaint. And another individual was standing at the inquiry, a former Collis CFO and town council member, recently emailed us to say that this was just a costly FOI. And I'm wondering if you can just expound and tell us why an integrity commissioner complaint or FOI request could not have accomplished what this judicial inquiry accomplished.
Well, with great respect, I think the FOI statement is just silly, because, you know, the whole problem with the evidence at the inquiry was, you know, the emails might say one thing, but then there's a whole layer of evidence, a whole layer of oral evidence, which led to a different conclusion. I'll give you one example. So an FOI might have produced an email between Mr. Houghton and the senior person at Sprung, Mr. Lloyd. Was Paul Bonwick involved with Sprung? To which the answer comes back, no, he had absolutely no involvement with Sprung. And the commissioner says, you know what? I find that that email exchange was completely contrived. And it was contrived to mislead people into thinking that was the end of the matter. Right? That was the end of the matter. That's the problem with the FOI complaint. And it's the same problem with the integrity commissioner's complaint. That there's an institutional capacity problem. That in order to get to the bottom of this, you had to have an enormous capacity to process digital information. For example, you had to have an effective power of subpoena. The integrity commissioner can't subpoena anybody, but has no power to compel production of documents for parties outside of the town. You know, it's fanciful to think that we would have a report with such rigorous findings, or frankly, any significant findings, if this had been done by an integrity commissioner. Integrity commissioners are good at making findings about some things. They're good about making findings about whether or not receipt of a gift was important, or whether or not a code of conduct was breached. But I think in finding whether or not there was impropriety in a procurement process, for example, whether or not there was undue influence being exerted with respect to municipal decision-making by people outside the municipality and inside, I just don't think that's within the institutional capacity of an integrity commission.
Just then, by way of follow-up to that, and thank you for that, Mr. McDowell. In your opinion, was there any other alternative available to the council of the day in order to properly find out the surrounding circumstances of the 2012 sale of 50% of the college shares and then the subsequent purchase of the BLT sprung buildings?
No, there wasn't. There was no effective substitute. You know, there's an ability under the Municipal Act to appoint an auditor to look at certain, you know, sort of a subsection of transactions. You can do that, but it's not the same thing as saying to a witness, okay, I have your documents. Now I want you to come and testify before a judicial officer who will make findings about the truth of what happened here. So there wasn't any effective alternative. I also know that there are some people who say, well, why didn't the town get the province to call a public inquiry, as in Walkerton, for example? And that's a good thought, but again, it's a thought that doesn't work because the province only will call a public inquiry into something that is a problem of provincial significance. And so if you look at the computer leasing inquiry in Toronto about 20 years ago, there were literally hundreds of millions of dollars at issue in that. You would have thought, well, the province could appoint an inquiry to look into that. It didn't, because this was thought, I think correctly, to be a City of Toronto problem. So I wish there were a better answer to this, but in my view, there wasn't any practical alternative available to the town. Either the town could have said, you know, we'll hire a consultant to look at this, and the town did try to do that and didn't get any good answers. Or the town could have said, we're just going to live with this and we're going to roll on. We're going to, whatever happened there is of no great concern to us. Or it had to do with it, what it did. So it's a long-winded answer, but no, I don't think there was an alternative.
Thank you for that answer. And thank you, gentlemen, for the presentation. And we will see you shortly in camera.
Right. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Your Worship.
All right, Council, that brings us to item 7, which is the consent agenda. And the motion is that Council herein receive the general consent agenda, and further that the information and opinions provided in the general consent agenda item are that of the authors and are not verified or approved as being correct. Item 7.1, Proclamation Kins Canada Day, February 20, 2021. 7.2, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Municipal Modernization Program, second intake. 7.3, Collingwood Climate Action Team, Climate Action Specialist position. 7.4, Township of Asphodel, Norwood, Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan Extension Request. 7.5, COVID-19 Vaccine Distribution Task Force Update. And 7.6, Tim Fryer, Letter re Collingwood Judicial Inquiry Critique. And first, I will ask for the motion to approve the consent agenda, and then I will ask for items to be pulled. And I've got Councillor Berman and Councillor Jeffrey as mover and seconder. I will call the motion. All in favor of receiving the consent agenda? That is carried unanimously. Council, any items to be pulled tonight? Seeing none, that brings us to reports and minutes of other committees and boards. And it's item 8.1, that the minutes of the following boards be hereby received and recommendations contained therein be approved. 8.1, Collingwood Public Library Board minutes, January 28, 2021. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Berman, seconded by Councillor Doherty. Any comments or questions before I call the vote? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Is there any item from the minutes that Council would like to pull? Seeing none. We then get to item 9.1, Standing Committee Report, Strategic Initiatives of February 1st, 2021 and February 8th, 2021. That was the meeting that we did in 2 meetings. That's how efficient we were. So I will read this in and I will look for a mover and seconder. 9.1.1. The council received the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee report from its meeting held February 1, 2021 and February 8, 2021, and hereby approve the recommendations contained within the report as presented. Reaffirmation of Council Code of Conduct, recommendation that Council reaffirm that they have read and continue to understand and adhere to the Council Code of Conduct. C 2021-1 Annual Board and Advisory Committee Report, recommendation that the report be received. T 2021-1 COVID-19 Economic Relief, Tax Penalty and Interest Relief, recommendation that penalties and interest charges for March and April 2021 with respect to the current year taxes be waived. CAO 2021-2 Phase 1 Collingwood Judicial Inquiry Next Steps in part. That Council herein received staff report CAO 2021-2 Phase 1 Collingwood Judicial Inquiry Next Steps and approved the report as amended unanimously by the Strategic Initiatives Committee, and that Council authorized proceeding with the request for proposal process for the recruitment of an Integrity Commissioner whose powers and duties are set out in the Municipal Act 2001 and who will report directly to Town Council and jointly serve as lobbyist registrar and provide fairness monitoring services and the proactive engagement of key partners and stakeholders. C 2021-2 Establishment in Terms of Reference Affordable Housing Task Force. Recommendation that staff report C 2021-2 Establishment in Terms of Reference Affordable Housing Task Force be received, and that Council support the establishment of an Affordable Housing Task Force, which includes attainable housing on the housing spectrum, and that further that Council approve in principle the draft terms of reference as amended and refer to the newly established task force to provide further input and feedback for consideration by the Strategic Initiatives Committee. C 2021-3 Committee and Board Governance Report Review in part. That staff report C 2021-3 Committee and Board Review be received, and that Council endorse in principle the amendments to the committee and board governance structure, establishing bylaws and terms of reference as recommended herein, and direct staff to proceed with public consultation as amended. These are all items, Council, that were passed unanimously at the meeting. We will be dealing subsequently with the items that were not passed unanimously. Does anybody wish to speak to an item to change the direction before I call the vote to receive and approve? Seeing none, then I'll go. Councillor McLeod, go ahead.
On the Strategic Initiatives Standing Committee meeting of February the 8th, there is a slight something in the minutes that I think that I would like to see addressed. Do we do that now, or do we do it after we receive it?
Let's do it now, please, if we're going to change the substance of the report.
So the under item, I think 7.74, 7.7.4, we amended the acceptance of the report, and that is contained in item 8 or 9.2.2 coming up in the next few minutes. But I'd like the wording that we as a council voted for to be included in the minutes, if that's possible. And I can provide that wording if we would like to amend those minutes.
Yes, why don't you read in the amendment, and then I'll look to Clerk Almus.
Okay. So the amendment was that staff report C 2021-03 committee and board review be received, and that staff report to council on the functions and work done by the committee of adjustment, the report including costs incurred by the committee since 2017, not limited to per diem and mileage and any other costs for operating the committee, as well as costs incurred in LPAT and OMB hearings since 2017, and the report detailing the implications of council absorbing the role of the committee within the Strategic Initiatives Committee with best practices examined from other municipalities.
Thank you, Councillor McLeod. Clerk Almus, my recollection is that was the amendment that was read in during the SIC meeting. Do we need to have that as a motion to amend the minutes, or can you just amend that based on the earlier discussions?
Certainly, Your Worship. So what this would do is when council is receiving tonight the SIC report from that meeting, it should be an amendment, so you should have a seconder to incorporate the fulsome comments related to that motion that it was read in. And then the motion, when you sever it, should contain all that additional detail.
Okay, so we've got Councillor McLeod moving a motion to amend the report, seconded by Councillor Berman. First, we will then deal with the motion to amend, and then we will deal with the motion to receive the report and the items that I read. Council, any comments or questions on the amendment? Seeing none, I'll call it. All in favor of receiving the amendment? That is carried. Thank you. And then going back then to the initial motion to receive the SIC report and the unanimous items as read out. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. And then item 9.2, and these are the items that were not approved unanimously at the SIC meeting, and I'll be reading out each separately. So 9.2.1 is CAO 2021-2 Phase 1 Collingwood Judicial Inquiry Next Steps in part. And item 1 is that Council hear and direct that a special meeting of Council, including in-camera sessions as necessary and deemed appropriate by the clerk, be held prior to February 28, 2021 for the purpose of the meeting of Council with Town of Collingwood former CAOs John Brown and Frida Men independently to provide the former CAOs the opportunity to provide their input on the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry Report and next steps. And that Council herein directs that the CAO obtain from the legal counsel for the Town of Collingwood for the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry a written final report regarding their work, outcomes, any recommendations with respect to the CJI, and that the report be provided to Council no later than 48 hours in advance of the meeting. And that members of Council be required to submit to the CAO their questions specific to the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry recommendations and next steps for response by any or all of the above parties no later than 72 hours in advance of the meeting. And that has a separate vote there. So perhaps I should call the vote then on those items first, and then we'll deal with the balance below that. Before I do call the vote though, I do have a question for CAO Skinner, and that is the timing of February 28, 2021. And I'm wondering if that is feasible or if an adjustment or acknowledgement of the tight timeline there.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I did raise some concerns. We only have one scheduled meeting prior to February 28th, which would be our council meeting on the 22nd, I believe. So just to give a bit of scheduling flexibility, should former CAOs John Brown and Frida Min not be able to come on that single date, if we could adjust it slightly to read something along the lines of prior to February 28th, or preferably prior to February 28th, or as soon as possible thereafter. It might save having a special meeting called prior to the 28th, unless Council would like a special meeting, in which case we would endeavor to follow the direction of Council, but it may be worthwhile providing a little flexibility to the CAOs if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll look to the mover. I think it was Councillor Jeffrey, and you've got your card up. Go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So I certainly respect the CAO's need for some flexibility there. Although I don't like leaving it open-ended, I'm wondering if the CAO would think that maybe a date of March 15th would be sufficient. That I would believe that would be our first council meeting of the month of March.
Sorry, just say that date again. I didn't catch it.
March 15th.
15th, okay. So CAO Skinner?
I think that pending conversation with the CAOs and their agreement to appear, that sounds like quite a reasonable date. And if it's not, we will have time to report back to Council prior to that date. So yes, that would be acceptable. Okay,
so Councillor Jeffrey, you were the mover, and I think Councillor Berman, you were the seconder at the SIC. Are you both comfortable with that March 15 date?
Yep.
All right. And Council, any other questions or comments before I call the vote on this portion? Councillor Berman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I think just because I asked for recorded votes at committee, I would do that. And here, in whatever format we did it at committee, as far as Sarah's nodding. So,
Okay, so we will have a recorded vote. And if there's no other questions or comments, Councillor Coney, go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. I apologize. Are we speaking to the friendly amendment right now or to the motion as a whole?
The friendly amendment has been adopted by virtue of the fact the mover and seconder have accepted. So I'm talking to the motion that goes from 9.2.1 sub 1 down to sub 2. So it's just the first 3 paragraphs there.
Okay, I would like to just speak to that, please.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. You know, just further to my comments at committee, this was not part of staff's recommendations following their report to us. And I firmly believe our public has reached their spending tolerance on this matter, and that we have an obligation to continue to respect the many other pressing financial needs of our town. So further to my vote at committee, I will not be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, I'll pass it to the clerk for a recorded vote, please.
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. A recorded vote has been requested. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your yes signs. Thank you. All those opposed, please raise your no signs. Thank you. Motion is carried 4-3.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, so dealing then with item 2, that the following paragraphs be deferred until Council has met with the Town of Collingwood's legal counsel and former CAOs, and that Council authorize the development of 3 white papers outlining potential changes to respective policies and practices, as well as judicial inquiry processes, with the intention to engage the public, including a virtual, if necessary, public town hall meeting, and engage Collingwood consultation for each, as well as direct consultations with stakeholders, including other municipalities and the province. And that staff report back to Council with a comprehensive set of recommendations for action after each consultation. So I will call the vote on that if there are, unless there are questions or comments on that particular portion that I just read. Seeing none, all in favor? Oh, Councillor Berman, did you ask for a recorded vote on all of these? My apologies. I'll pass it to the clerk.
Sorry, just for clarification, we're using Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Berman as the mover and seconder.
Yes.
Okay. All right, a recorded vote has been requested. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your yes cards. Thank you. All those opposed, please raise your no cards. Thank you. Motion is carried 4-3.
And then item 9.2.2, I have revised wording. All right. The revised wording for 9.2.2, which is C 2021-3 Committee and Boards Governance Review, in part reads, be it resolved that Council request a staff report on the Committee of Adjustments, property standards, including the functions and work done by the Committee of Adjustment, all costs incurred by the committee since 2017, not limited to per diem and mileage and any other costs for operating the committee, as well as costs incurred in LPAT and OMB hearings since 2017, as well as implications of Council absorbing the role of the committee within Strategic Initiatives Committee, with best practices examined from other municipalities. And Councillor McLeod, that was your amendment. So will you be moving that? And seconded by Councillor Berman. And Councillor McLeod, would you like to speak to the amendment?
I'm confused because this is the words that I used are the words that we passed at that meeting on February the 8th. So I'm not entirely sure that more discussion needs to take place.
Well, it was your opportunity.
Oh, thank you, but I'm good.
All right then. Are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, then I will call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you, and that is carried. And that brings us to Standing Committee Report, Corporate and Community Services, February 1, 2021.
Sorry, Your Worship.
Sorry, did I miss one?
We have one more, the Trails and Active Transportation Terms of Reference.
Yes, thank you. So it is, the recommendation is that the terms of reference as approved by the Trails and Active Transportation Committee be approved by Council. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Berman and seconded by Councillor McLeod. And Councillor Jeffrey, you wanted to speak? Oh, this is one of your conflict items?
Actually, yeah, I missed this, Mayor Saunderson. This is an additional one because there's two parts with the active trails and transportation. The report is only problematic for me because there's recommendations and I believe the terms of reference as approved by the trails as opposed to developed by the committee will. So I will add another recusing myself to 9.2.2 sub 1 or sub 2.
Good, thank you.
And I will.
All right. So are there any questions or comments, Council, before I call the vote on this? Go ahead, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Your Worship. I voted against this motion at Standing Committee, and I will do it again tonight, just because based on the mandate of our newly created Trails and Active Transportation Committee, I disagree with the notion that that work can be accomplished with 4 meetings a year as defined in the terms of reference. And so for that reason and that reason only, I will not be supporting it.
Okay, and just for clarity, I believe in the terms of reference, it says at least 4 times a year and allows the ability for the committee to call additional meetings should it deem appropriate.
Yeah, that is correct. However, none of the other terms of references for the other committees, at least that I am aware, contain those particular references to meeting frequency.
Okay, I don't know if Clerk Thomas wants to address that.
Certainly, there are a few committees through Your Worship to Councillor Doherty that specify that. Sorry, I didn't look it up before our meeting. For example, Police Services Board is a minimum of 4 a year. I believe the Accessibility Advisory Committee is a minimum of 6 per year, but they're all based off of a minimum amount. I can confirm that most of our committees and boards meet almost monthly, if not more.
Thank you. Does that assist, Councillor Doherty?
Yes, it does. However, as I say, I think that it does not speak to the importance of this newly established committee just by virtue of a lower frequency of meeting.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, then I will call the vote. All in favor? And opposed? Duly noted. Brings us to 9.3, Standing Committee Report, Corporate and Community Services from February 1, 2021. 9.3.1, the Council received the Corporate and Community Services Standing Committee Report from its meeting held February 1, 2021, and hereby approve the recommendations contained within the report as presented. Trails and Active Transportation Advisory Committee 2020 activities and 2021 goals. Vice Chair Justin Jones, recommendation that the presentation be received. And perhaps before I continue, we've got a conflict on this one too, I believe. B City standards, program standards recommendation that Council supports the mayor in executing the resolution as provided in the B City application. I'm wondering, Clerk Thomas, if we want to sever this so that we can allow Councillor Jeffrey to participate in the latter. So first, I think I will just call the vote on the Trails and Active Transportation recommendations. Questions or comments, Council? Oh, I need a mover and seconder, please. Councillor McLeod and Councillor Comey. So I'm calling the vote just on the Trails and Active Transportation Advisory Committee. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. And Clerk Thomas, if you can invite Councillor Jeffrey back in. Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. So we're at 9.3.1, second item, the B City program standards. So the recommendation is that council supports the mayor in executing the resolution as provided for in the B City application. Can I get a mover and a seconder for this item since I've severed them? Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Comey. Any questions or comments before I call the vote, council? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. And motions 10.1. This is moved by Councillor Berman. I'll read it in and then I'll look for a seconder and then allow Councillor Berman to speak. Whereas Section 224A of the Municipal Act states that its first definition of the role of council is to quotation to represent the public and to consider the well-being and interest of the municipality end quotation. And whereas the town of Collingwood has implemented many policies to ensure the accountability and transparency of its elected officials, staff, and volunteers, not limited to the Code of Conduct, Lobbyist Registry, Procedural Bylaws, Council Staff Relations Policy, etc. And whereas the town of Collingwood continues to encourage and create platforms for its residents to write to council, speak at meetings, vote online, and otherwise participate in the democratic process. And whereas we have all borne witness, never more so than in recent months, to the negative effects that false information can have on a society. And whereas correspondence contained in the consent agenda may contain information that is factually incorrect, it is important that the public be aware of the correct information and it to be part of the official meeting record where possible. Therefore, be it resolved, the Council of the Town of Collingwood adopt the following process regarding items on the consent correspondence agenda. 1, if a member of council believes the information pertaining to Town of Collingwood decisions, records, or information contained in a piece of correspondence within the consent agenda is factually incorrect, the member shall contact staff as soon as possible to verify accuracy. 2, if staff confirm the information as inaccurate, the member of council may pull the specific consent item during the meeting and request clarification be provided by staff. And 3, once clarification is provided by staff, the member may introduce the following motion. Quotation, the council received the clarification as provided by insert staff title regarding consent item, insert number as follows, insert correct information. A seconder shall be required. It's moved by Councillor Berman. Is there a seconder for Councillor Berman's motion? Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Berman, would you like to speak to your motion?
Oops. Yes, please. So this is a very, in my opinion, a very small idea about a very big problem. It popped into my head on January 6th, probably like a lot of us. I was watching what happened at the US Capitol and how much of it was based on misinformation. And over the next couple of weeks till we had our, I think it was January 18th council meeting, I was thinking about how do we deal with it? Because we're dealing with a lot of big problems, COVID, climate crisis, so on and so forth, and trying to find a way to help at a municipal level. So I mentioned it under other business, I think the night of the 18th. And then a couple of days later had an idea on how I wanted to keep politics out of it and really just use it as a fact check on stuff that staff has posted on the town website. So that would be things to do with numbers, things to do with policies, things to do with voting records, which are already on there. So I had maybe a 15-minute conversation with the clerk who really wrote most of this for me and hashed it out on the easiest way to do this. And that's the motion you have in front of you. But the issues that I'm thinking about, and I come bearing props, and hopefully the one on the definition of censorship doesn't need to be used. But these are news stories recently. I won't pull them up too close, but Medical Association releases data showing COVID-19 misinformation still being spread. And I think we've all probably read stuff about that. Scientists launched social media campaign to counter COVID-19 misinformation. We're dealing with systemic racism here. And here's one from UNESCO, deconstructing misinformation, hate speech, and racism for promotion of cultural diversity during COVID-19 pandemic. Here's one, Facebook says it's cracking down on climate change misinformation. Scientists say that's not doing enough. And then I found this one, and I'm going to ask a question of the clerk that I think I know the answer to. Dominion Voting Systems suing Rudy Giuliani over unfounded election fraud claims. And my question of the clerk is, who did we use in the 2018 election?
Rick Almus?
Certainly through your worship to Council Berman, that would be Dominion Voting.
Thank you. And then the last one, oh, I think it's the last one. No, second last one. Facebook calls on Canadian government to set social media rules. Well, I'm not looking for social media rules. People can comment. They can write anything that they want on a consent agenda. I welcome the letters, as I think we all do. It's just when what they've posted is incorrect based on the data that staff have already posted on the town website, I would like that to be able to be corrected because it's part of the permanent record. And I don't think it's enough just to have a general disclaimer. It needs to be sort of on the page that people might look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And that's really the logic behind it. And again, like any transparency vote, I'll ask for a recorded vote on this.
Thank you, Councillor Berman. Council questions or comments? Go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you. Just a question through to Councillor Berman. So would we maintain the disclaimer anyway, just in case there's something someone missed in terms of picking it up and reading the consent agenda? I'm assuming we would do a general one, but then there would be specifics that are picked up on a case-by-case basis.
Councillor Berman?
I can't see the harm to that. I'd look through to the clerk. That would stay the same in my opinion, or my intention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments, Council? Councillor Hamlin and then Councillor Comey.
Thank you. I will not be supporting this motion. As I understand it, what we're being asked to do as a member of council is to identify information on our agenda that's been written where people write into us. And if we find anything to be factually incorrect, is the words in the motion, then we have an obligation to contact staff as soon as possible. And the word is that the member, that's the council member, shall contact staff as soon as possible. And, you know, the motion indicates at the beginning, you know, one of the roles of council is to represent the public. And when the public speaks, we are, you know, our job therefore is to take their thoughts and concerns into our deliberations. And sometimes when residents write us to express their thoughts and concerns, it's because they're upset. And why is that? Many of the matters we deal with, of course, are very close to our residents' lives, their day-to-day lives, where they live. And sometimes people express themselves in a way we might not like, we might not agree with. It might come across as facts, but really it's an opinion. But our average resident, they're not a researcher and they don't know how to get the facts. You know, we might be able to call a staff person and say, what was that number? What happened on that day and so on. But most of our residents, they're just writing because they have something they want to say. And then I thought, you know, someone could write in and say, just as an example, you shouldn't have spent $100,000 on repaving that sidewalk. That's not in line, or that's against all the priorities of the town, right? So we have two errors. You know, we have the amount maybe, because maybe the amount was only 50,000 and the councillor would have to, you know, immediately call staff and find out what the right number was. And then also, how could that be against all the priorities? Well, okay, another call to staff. What are the priorities? So, and really, what was that resident's problem? Maybe the resident's problem was they wanted as many funds as could be found to build a new baseball diamond for the kids, but they don't know how to say that, so they come out with what we saw or what we get. And what are we left with then? You know, do we bring that as a council member? We notice these errors. We get staff to give us the correct information. And then we've got a job, do we, you know, bring it to the public and add to some public shaming and blaming of the resident who got the facts wrong? When in fact, if someone had just read the letter a little closer, they may have realized what the real problem was and had nothing to do with the facts that are incorrect. you know, it's open for counselors too, and I don't mean anyone particular on this council, might be the next council, and the one after that. They don't like a resident who's writing in. And they see this as a great opportunity to shame and blame in public, like embarrassment, you know, attack the public and bring them some embarrassment. So what kind of council are we, I ask myself, if we're going to be nitpicking on our residents who take the time and effort to write to us? To my mind, that's not representing the public, it's attacking the public. And when you look at the Municipal Act, yes, there's lots in there about accountability and transparency. There is nothing about accountability and transparency of residents in making statements to their elected representatives. All of the accountability and transparency is on our shoulders as elected representatives, because we're representing the public, we're spending the public funds, we're telling staff what to do. So the public's not accountable to us and our processes. I think the disclaimer that's been put on our consent agenda is more than sufficient. I've never seen such a disclaimer on agendas in any municipality. It's clear. The facts in these letters are not, you know, attested to by us. Those opinions are the writers, not ours. I certainly don't want to have the job of identifying errors in correspondence on our agenda and publicly shaming anyone. And I don't want to see debates, quite frankly, on our council, you know, so we're going to have an agenda, you know, an errors found. It's, you know, staff provides the right information. One of the council members brings a motion. So they're going to address the error. Council gets to debate it all the while. You know, like, what are we doing here? Anyway, all to say, I'm not in favor of this. Thank you.
Councillor Hamlin, Councillor Comey, and then Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and to Councillor Hamlin, that's very well said. I certainly don't mean to repeat, but there's certainly some ideas that are about to overlap. And now, full disclosure, I didn't Google myself for prior quotes on communication in the community as have been presented by others. But I'm certain in both action and words, I've encouraged and welcomed a diverse range of participation before this council on a variety of issues. The motion before us reads to me like a procedural burden. We work for our residents. It is our duty to encourage and welcome discourse, even and especially when residents challenge us. It is my position this motion will discourage participation and create undue burden on both staff and residents who are comprised of all manner of education and experience, something Councillor Hamlin was more or less touching on. And I fear they will hesitate to come forward now for fear of being called out in a public forum. I do not see this as a best practice. I see it as a concerning trajectory away from public input at a time we need it most. I will definitely not be supporting this motion, and I'm glad that it's a recorded vote. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've had the request for a recorded vote, but there you go. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm also not inclined to support this motion, as my two colleagues have quite eloquently stated, and I share those feelings. I could add to that a concern that inaccuracies can be large or small. And my concern might be that at some point, a statement or communication from a resident could be called out for reasons that are prejudicial or political in nature, and that is a concern. I certainly appreciate the sentiment under which this motion has been brought forward by Councillor Berman, but I just do not believe that this is the tool to address it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments, Council? Councillor McLeod, And then I've got you, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to thank my council colleagues for giving me something to think about. I certainly may not end up agreeing with them, but I take it as food for thought. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So I think this has been disproportionately taken out of context as to the purpose. And I don't think it happens all that often, but I think the examples we've seen even in the last couple of months are cause for concern, because we allow the public to potentially abuse our process for things other than for good. And we all understand that members of the public don't understand all of our processes. And so I don't think that we would be that harsh and that it's anything that extreme. And I do agree that people looking back on these public records would look at something and not know whether it was accurate or not. And they're kept for a very long time and get quoted in the future for a very long time. So my only thing would be if my colleagues are maybe worried about the word shall. I think the disclaimer takes care of most things, but I think an opportunity that if we change the word from shall to may, then it gives all members of council the opportunity to ask staff to verify the information and ensure it's correct in cases. And I don't, Councillor Berman can confirm or deny this on his own, but I don't think it was his intention to give us another job that we had to scrutinize, and we're responsible for scrutinizing the consent agenda from that perspective. But in our reading, if we saw something we really felt was detrimental to the greater public, because the public we're serving aren't just the public writing the letters, they're the public who are counting on us to use that information going forward. So I'm going to, maybe first of all, I'll ask to do an amendment to change shall to may from that perspective. And but I'll wait till the comments are finished before I do that.
Well, no, I think we'll deal with it. And I think you were the secondary, Councillor Jeffrey, were you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's been I think a friendly request, and Councillor Berman, are you prepared to accept that amendment?
Absolutely. I thought the part that said if a member of council believes the information implied that nobody had to act on it. When Councillor Hamlin used the word obligation, I thought to myself, that's not what I asked for. So yeah, if the first part wasn't understandable, I'm happy to change that one word.
Okay, so we're now changing the shall to may, in that the member may contact staff as soon as possible to verify accuracy. And it's been accepted by the mover and the seconder. And I'll look to Clerk Alma. She's got her card up.
Sorry, Your Worship, just for clarification, shall shows up in the first bullet because if a member of council is requesting staff to verify the accuracy publicly, we want staff to be contacted. The second two bullets say that if staff confirm, the member may pull the specific consent item at the meeting. And once clarification is provided, the member may introduce a motion as follows. So I think we tried to capture that.
So what you're saying is the shall means that the member cannot correct it without staff input. Is that what the shall is, the obligatory terminology is for?
If that council member, is fully aware of that information and doesn't require it to be fact checked by staff, but staff at the meeting, I don't think should be put in a position to quickly assess whether something is correct or incorrect.
Well, what if we said May 1st contact staff? In other words, if the council member wishes to pursue this, their first line of action is to contact staff to verify the accuracy. So in other words, it's not obligatory, which Councillor Hammond had pointed out, and I agree with the wording shall. It does have that connotation, but I understand what you're saying. So if we say May 1st contact, so if the council member wishes to pursue it, they may first contact staff to verify.
I guess my only concern, your worship, with that is if they do May and they don't contact staff and we're asked to comment, that we may not have the answer at the table.
Right.
So if that's acceptable to council.
Well, look to Councillor Berman, whose motion it is.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Saunderson. And I agree with the clerk. We talked about this over a month ago. So in the debate at the table over whether this is a debate, you're right. That is what we talked about. So we get an agenda, we read a consent agenda item that we think that the records you've posted on the town website are contrary to that. We contact you. We're not fact checking ourselves. We're alerting staff, as you've said, and then you're going to deem whether it's, you know, the vote was 7-2 or the amount was $200,000. And then you're going to get back to us when we talk about it at the meeting. So I got your wording when you explained it a month ago. It got lost in the debate here. No, I agree with the clerk. The wording is the same. I don't know where obligatory came from. I got lost in that whole discussion. In fact, I think that this was so, sorry, may I just make a closing final statement or no?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that the wording of this made such sense when we did this a month ago. And I think that once I heard obligatory and, stopping residents from writing in, I felt like some of my colleagues just didn't understand what the motion was. But that's fine. It is what it is. All I wanted to do was we do our small part, as we do on COVID and climate crisis, to stop the spread of misinformation. That's it. Not our opinions, not our residents' opinions. That's it. And just there was, sorry, I got where Councillor Comey was going. There was a quote that I quite liked. It wasn't Councillor Comey's. And it was posted on Collingwood today in response to this. And it said, all the public is looking for is accurate information, numbers, and procedures from our elected officials. And I think that's exactly what we're asking the clerk and staff to fact check. And I did a couple of weeks ago, Steve Rowe, whoever that is, but I couldn't have said that better myself. So thank you.
Okay. Clerk Thomas?
Certainly. I think the discrepancy comes with, if there is an error, is it mandatory that you bring it to staff's attention? So maybe the end of that first bullet should say, shall contact as soon as possible to verify accuracy if they wish to bring this forward at a meeting.
Yeah, okay. I think that addresses it because I think the concern was if you see something, you're obliged to do this. And what we're now saying is that the member shall contact staff as soon as possible to verify their accuracy if they wish to pursue it. Was that the wording we're adding in there?
Yeah.
Okay, so I see nodding of heads of the mover and the seconder to address that concern. All right, and are there any further questions or comments? Seeing none, I will just say that throughout the time I've been involved in municipal council, I've seen it as a dialogue between our residents and ourselves as council members and our staff on behalf of the town of Collingwood. I don't see anything in this motion that is being seen other than to make sure that that discussion is fulsome. When somebody writes on a consent agenda, it's not the same as sending an email to council and asking a question or pursuing a matter with a specific council member. When you put it on the consent agenda, it's a matter of public record. And I think a discussion about the accuracy of those comments is fair game. And we all want to see a fulsome discussion about what goes on in our community. And I see this as part of that. I don't see this as pecuniary or shaming, punitary or shaming type exercise. I see this as an exercise in fulsome open discussion. So I will be supporting it. And with that said, I've got a request for a recorded vote, so I will pass it to the clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. A recorded vote has been requested. All those in favor, please raise your yes signs. Thank you. All those opposed, please raise your no signs. Thank you. Motion is carried 4-3.
All right. And item 10.2 has been removed, which brings us to bylaws. And this is the procedural bylaw to amend the in-camera recording procedure that we voted on earlier. And so the motion is that bylaw number 2021-4 being a bylaw to amend procedural bylaw number 2019-75 specific to the retention of in-camera session recordings be enacted and passed the 16th day of February 2021. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor Jeffrey and seconded by Councillor Berman. And then I see request to speak from Councillor Berman.
Just for recorded vote, please.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hammond, did you have your card up? Go ahead.
So I'm in the negative vote tonight, mode tonight. I'm not going to support this either. There has been never seen a recommendation that council keep audio recordings of its in-camera sessions. It did not come out as one of the 300 odd recommendations of the judicial inquiry. It's nothing contained in any requirements of under the Municipal Act or any other accountability. And once these sessions are recorded, you know, I'm again worried about the chill effect on councillors speaking at in-camera meetings. And I recognize, of course, that some things that are said are not going to be allowed to be requisitioned through freedom of information because of the nature of them, but other things will be. So I'm not supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments, Council? Councillor Comey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to court, something that struck me, I was type of IT thoughts I have sort of after the fact. Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I forgot to say that. These meetings are being recorded and stored on USB drives, is that correct? And you know, it dawned on me because I think, again, I won't be supporting this as I did in the past, but correct me, the retention was some period of 7 years, is that correct?
6 years. Clerk Almas?
Correct, 6
Yes.
years.
And it just made me think that over time, you know, those USB drives 6 years from now will probably potentially be obsolete, you know, just like we no longer have those little CD loading things on our laptop. So I won't be supporting it. If it does pass, I hope there's wiggle room for staff to continue to consider cloud-based options or other IT solutions that will grow with the time. And that's just the comment I wanted to offer. Thank you.
Thank you. I think security would be the driving force there. Any other questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, I do have a question to Clerk Almas. Clerk Almas, can you just refresh when these documents, recordings would be released? Under what circumstances would any of these be released?
Certainly, Your Worship, they can only be released to a closed meeting investigator or by court order.
Okay,
I believe. But it is very strict on how they can be accessed. You know, for clarification though, if at any time council wishes to change those provisions to access them, they could do that through a potential simple majority.
Okay, thank you. I see your card, Councillor Hamlin. I'm just going to go around and see if there's any other council that hasn't spoken yet. Seeing none, go ahead, Councillor Hamlin.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I just have a follow-up question based on your question, Mr. Mayor, to the clerk. What is giving the restriction on us releasing these recordings? Like where is that found?
Sarah?
Certainly, through Your Worship, it's within our procedural bylaw amendment that was passed whenever council authorized this last February, I believe.
And I know this is a pretty technical question I'm going to ask, but if someone's requesting these through freedom of information laws, would that law take precedence over our procedural bylaw?
Sarah?
Certainly, in-camera recordings can't be released through the IPC unless I'm just trying to find the section within that, procedure. So in-camera meetings can only be released if the council agrees to it, or if it falls within the parameters that we have set out within our procedural bylaw. And any FOI request that would come in to access those would fall within one of the exemptions that are provided within the Municipal Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act.
My question's probably not, through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll just say by way of comment, my question's probably not fair to be asking a clerk, because I think it is quite a legal question I'm asking, which is, because, you know, I would have thought that we can put anything we want in our procedural bylaw, but if the law is such that, you know, these recordings can be released, then they're going to be released. So, but I suspect we don't have a legal opinion on this question before us. Would that be right, through you, Mr. Mayor?
All right. Any other questions or comments, Council? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I'd just like to comment that we had the entire debate when it was presented to Council, and this is simply presenting the bylaw to affect that. So I really, well, I don't see the problem with expressing your disappointment, or I just don't see the point of bringing up any mountains to climb. It's a very common sense. We've been recording them all along. There's been no problem. And if we're going to repeat comments from the debate, I think our judicial inquiry would have been a lot simpler had we had access to recorded in-camera recordings for the justice. So I'll be supporting this.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions or comments, I will pass it to the clerk. I think we had a request for a recorded vote.
Certainly. Through your worship, a recorded vote has been requested. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your yes cards. Thank you. All those opposed, please raise your no cards. Thank you. Motion is carried 5-2.
Thank you. Item 12, notices of motion. Are there any notices of motion today, Council? Seeing none, county report. Well, the deputy mayor is not here tonight, and that's his bailiwick, so we'll leave that for next meeting. Older deferred business, item 14. Is there any older deferred business for tonight, Council? Seeing none, other business, and Councillor Doherty, you have an item under other business.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I have been contacted by a number of residents, as I know the rest of council have been, in regard to the opening of our ski resort. And I understand for sure the concerns of the public in this regard. But I just would like to reiterate, as someone who operated a business in this community for a long time, that this request is not frivolous. You know, that the industry was in many ways blindsided by the decision not to be permitted to open, as every other jurisdiction, certainly in Canada, and I believe in the world, was permitted to have their, or every other jurisdiction did permit their ski resorts to remain open. And other recreational facilities were able to be open. Over 1,000 people just in our area have been very hard hit by the closure of our resorts, and they want and they need to get back to work. And our small businesses have been devastated by the closure, and they urgently need to reopen to bring in income and to bring their employees back to work. So this industry has a profound impact on the economy of our region and on the pocketbooks of a lot of our residents. I'm just gonna add that I spoke at length with Andrew Siegwart, and I also spoke to or corresponded with Beth Potter, who is the president and CEO of the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario. And I was looking for assurance as to the rigor with which the ski industry protocols have been implemented. And Ms. Potter assured me that the Ski Hill Working Group was not only effective in developing stringent operating protocols, these have now been established as best practice going forward for the entire Ontario outdoor tourism industry. The Minister of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Culture, McLeod, in 2 of her public engagements last week, outlined the path forward to reopen and build capacity for outdoor tourism attractions as our restrictions lift, using protocols similar to what the Ski Hill Working Group came up with. As further assurance, the resort will be operating at 50% of capacity or less, with priorities given to seasons pass holders. The largest proportion of those are local. The resort will target its communication activities to the local market and will not be undertaking any marketing outside of Southern Georgian Bay. This will benefit not only the safety of the patrons who will be going to our ski hills, but also the capacity of our ER indirectly. Although, as noted in Collingwood Today last month, even during a regular ski season, as we experienced in the first part of 2020, less than 10% of ER visits were comprised of injuries from the hill. And I also had a conversation last week with Mike Lecroix, who is the acting CAO for CGMH. And he indicated to me that the hospital leadership is ready and supportive of the ski hills. So just wanted just to take the opportunity to assure our residents that the industry does have the concern of our area at heart as they move forward with reopening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doherty. Any questions or comments, Council? Any other business tonight? Seeing none, then we'll go to item 15, which is the in-camera motion. Whereas the clerk hereby concurs the reasons for the in-camera session have been duly reviewed and considered, and the matters are authorized under the exception provisions to conduct a closed session in accordance with the Municipal Act prior to proceeding into closed session. Therefore, be it resolved that this council proceeds in camera in order to address a matter pertaining to 1, the security of the property of the town or local board; 2, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposal of land for town or local board purposes; 3, the receiving of advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. And the items for discussion are A, CJI, solicitor-client communications; B, Culvert Estate; and C, Mountain Road Widening Project. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor Berman, seconded by Councillor Doherty. Are there any questions or comments, Council, before I call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. It's now 7:25, and why don't we reconvene at 25 to 8? And for any press or other interested parties, there will be no rise and report tonight. When we come out, we will enact the confirming bylaw and then adjourn the meeting. So with that said, we will take a 10-minute recess and we'll meet back at 7:35. Sorry. See you then.
Do we need to leave and come back?
No.
Thank you.
So you're live again.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. So I need a motion that council rise from in camera and resume open session at 9:38 p.m. Moved by Councillor Berman, seconded by Councillor Doherty. All in favor? Thank you. So we will now deal with the confirmatory bylaw, item 16.1. The bylaw number 2021-5 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the regular meeting of council held February 16, 2021 be enacted and passed the 16th day of February 2021. Mover and a seconder, please. Moved by Councillor Hammond, seconded by Councillor Comey. All in favor? That is passed unanimously, and I think that brings us to our adjournment, Councillor Jeffrey. Moved by Councillor Jeffrey. All in favor? That is also passed unanimously. Thank you very much, Council. It was a busy night. Thank you, staff. And we will see you tomorrow. Take care. Bye.